Well, what I will say is that between the year that he got in 2013 and today, those have been very good years for the Kenyattas' wealth. There have been questions about, for instance, in the merger between the Kenyattas Bank, which was used to be called the Commercial Bank of Africa, and the National Industrial Credit Bank, which they merged with, that there were certain taxes that that merger wasn't exposed to. And these are very big banks, right? Whereas any other type of merger similar to that would have been exposed to all sorts of taxes. There's also claims that the parastatal that deals in milk in this country, the Kenya Cooperative Creameries, seems to have been deliberately mismanaged over this period of time, to the advantage of Brookside. Now, of course, that's much harder to, it's harder to prove, but the allegation stands nonetheless. This at a time when milk producers are facing all sorts of, I think, 7 or 8 separate taxes before they can sell their milk, meaning that nobody's making profit from that industry, right? And that's the issue here, where there is this feeling that the Kenyattas, as well as other political elite, have become fabulously wealthy. Not so much directly at the expense of well, let me put it this way. They have become fabulously wealthy at a time when Kenya is suffering from perhaps its worst, the worst levels of corruption that it has seen in years, right? Especially when it comes to infrastructure development and that sort of thing. They've been huge sinks for corruption. The beneficiaries of these kinds of projects have been people who associate themselves with the Kenyattas. In fact, there are certain instances where relatives of the Kenyattas have been beneficiaries of tenders and that sort of thing that seem to not have been, awarded fairly, right? And that's the question that we're asking. Look, it's okay to be president. It's okay to have come from a wealthy family. You might not even be responsible for whatever things have happened in the past, but give Kenyans a fighting chance to be able to make lives for themselves, to be able to live dignified lives. But, when we see what's happened over the past 10 years, it has put every generation going forward in a position where they're more indebted, with less of an opportunity to be able to work, to be able to earn and live dignified lives. So it's left us all the poorer at a time when lots of other tenderpreneurs and political cronies, some of whom, like I said, associate themselves with the Kenyattas, have been associated with the Kenyattas, are making all sorts of bank. And that's just not right.
And so do you feel that when Uhuru Kenyatta talks about, an anti-corruption campaign, you think he's genuine?
He might be genuine. He might be speaking genuinely as a member of, as a president, because a president can't reach down and essentially, pluck bad people out of specific places. But there's certain things that he can inform in terms of policy, etc., that could improve the situation in this country. Corruption for sure predates him, right? So it's not fair to say that he's solely responsible for everything that we see. But like I said, there's been a huge uptick ever since he got into power. So whereas he might be speaking from his heart and speaking genuinely, the things on the ground tell a completely different story. Such a different story that he himself has said that Kenya loses 2 billion shillings, which is the equivalent of what, $20 million? No, not $20 million, let's see. It's exchanging at 100 years, or somewhere around $20 million a day to corruption, right? Now, 2 billion shillings could build if I'm gauging correctly, some of the hospitals that have been built, 2 billion shillings could build maybe about 12 hospitals in this country, right? 2 billion shillings would have taken us much, much further ahead in terms of the fight against COVID, the procurement of vaccines, right? In fact, it is the COVID pandemic that shows you just how deeply corrupt this government, this regime has been. Because at a time when we should have been investing in healthcare, at that time, we had people stealing from the public coffers through funds that were dedicated for COVID-19 mitigation. So that tells you as much as you need to know about whether Uhuru Kenyatta is being genuine or not. Like I said, he might be genuine as a person, but that's not what the facts say.
And that bank merger that you talked about, that they didn't, pay any of the relevant taxes, that other companies would have had to pay. I mean, why was that?
Again, this is a problem with being in a situation in which we are. All sorts of legitimate reasons would be given for why that happened in that way. But what is perceived is that they just, wanted to be able to do this and do this cheaply and retain as much resources in the bank through the bank merger as possible, not pay relevant, maybe like capital gains tax, etc., or whatever taxes that merger would have been exposed to. How it's been described is that there's been one rule for the elite, especially the elite that's connected to power, and another for everybody else. So that's what the perception is. I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thanks. And just going back to this bank merger again, when it wasn't clear to me about if relevant certain taxes should be paid in mergers or capital gains tax or whatever, and they are presumably still being paid in other instances, then who makes the decision that in this instance it didn't have to be paid?
Those are decisions that are made by the regulators. Banks are regulated by the central bank. I think one of those banks, I don't know if either one of them are publicly traded, but if they were, they would have also been regulated by the Capital Markets Authority. So it's a regulator that makes the decision. But the regulator lives in Kenya. The regulator knows who the political, elite are in this country, and therefore it would be assumed that there would be some kind of pressure brought to bear on regulators to be able to have different rules for different people. That speaks to somewhat of the unofficial rule book in this country. Let me give other examples. There are, I've heard from multiple sources, parastatals whose parastatal heads have to give a certain amount of money to very senior political players in this country as patronage, in a sense, for their position that they occupy. That's one unofficial way in which people are able to build wealth in this country. It's very raw, it's very rudimentary way of stealing, but it's also very effective because your fingernails are clean, essentially. Other ways are through theft via budgets, where budgets that are supposed to be the property of ministries and parastatals and are supposed to be kept under lock and key until tenders are brought forward or are advertised, are then discussed with players way before they're even declared or advertised, and therefore the players have a leg up. That you see a lot of political players, a lot of political elite involved in. So there's various ways in which people can, especially people who are politically connected in this country, can become wealthy by gaming the system, by using their influence to manipulate the system and the people in it. So, like I said, it's very difficult for me to comment on the bank merger, without the actual facts. But what the narrative is speaks more to that kind of unofficial system of governance, in a sense, that we've seen, far more clearly in other sectors of Kenyan society.
Is Kenya a part of any kind of international treaties like the FATF, or in terms of money laundering and like that?
Yes, it is, and we've also been updating our anti-money laundering laws to put them in line with international standard practice. So your know your customer laws are just as good here as they are in other countries. We would, to give the example of what happened with SWIFT in Ukraine, we also play by the same kinds of rules, where you have to be able to declare where the sources of revenue, where there are proposals for lawyers to be able to declare the wealth that they have or are holding on behalf of their clients. So it's not for a lack of laws or a lack of treaties that Kenya struggles with illicit financial flows. It's really the political networks, that power that's brought to bear against the system that forces people to either do the wrong thing or makes them players in the same game for their own benefit. Yeah, so if you're looking for answers in the law or gaps in the law, Kenya has none. That's not where to look. Where to look is where the power lies. And that's what's going to give you a clearer answer about who exactly is running this country and what it is that they can do.
Mm. And where does the power lie?
The power lies right at the top. Right at the top, with the president, with the deputy president, with the political elite, but more so also with the business elite that have entrenched themselves for years and years around both the political players as well as civil servants. That's where the power lies. The power lies in being able to, through wealth or sheer manipulation or through force, manipulate our political systems, underfund certain arms of government, overfund others. The power lies in being able to make decrees that are not legal and still have them, go through. That's part of our political legacy. That's where the power lies. I think it would be unfair to talk about the Kenyattas and Kenya's political, economic elite investing in offshore structures and offshore finance without talking about the makers of those same structures. That's actually where a big chunk of the problem is. That the United Kingdom, that the United States increasingly, that various other territories in the West are not only refusing to dismantle or make more open and accountable these kinds of systems, but are actively supporting territories that allow for the inflow of illicit financial wealth, even legitimately earned wealth, into places where it's so it's so difficult to understand where the sources of wealth are. That's where a big part of this problem is. Because if the makers of the system are unwilling to make it more open and accountable, then that just makes it all that much easier for anybody around the world who actually wants to either be a criminal or steal from their country to be able to do that. And we all know that if we're talking about global finance and global power, that's where a lot of the decisions are made, unfortunately. And so we become victims twice, where when we are asking for our wealth to be returned, it becomes so difficult for us to have that happen. There's a case right now that has taken over 20 years for funds to be repatriated. The Congolese still don't have the wealth from Mobutu Sese Seko's reign returned. The Nigerians still don't have wealth from Sani Abacha and many other people returned. I'd say the same probably of the Dos Santos regime. So Africa is the one that suffers when countries that do not that actively build these systems, actively finance these systems and protect them, don't do enough to be able to make them more open and accountable. That's just not right. And the world needs to be able to wake up to something like this. They'll shout about the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musks and Apples and all sorts of things, but they're eerily silent about the wealth that's being taken out of this country and invested because it helps their countries. That's not right.